love family. It is your favorite cousin, your favorite nephew, your favorite uncle, your favorite son, your favorite father, your best friend's best friend. It's me, Dr. Larry, and welcome to the Living For You YouTube channel. This is a place where we come and we relax and we come together and we share and we commune and we get to know each other and we love and we also grow. While you're growing, I'm growing, and we grow together. So this is a safe space. This is a wonderful place for us just to share and engage in that moment. For those of you who are new, welcome. You're now family. Go ahead and subscribe so you can officially be a part of the family, so that we're here together and we are existing in this space of love together. So let me take that out. So that we're existing in this place of love and acceptance. So go ahead and hit the subscribe button so that you know when things are getting put out there and whatnot. For those of you, once again, who are new, I am Dr. Larry Smith. You can follow me on Instagram or Facebook at Dr. Larry Smith, or on Twitter at Dr. Larry Smith PhD. Or you can go to www.liveforyoucoaching.com to learn more about me, my background, how did I come to this place. If you just continue to come every week and view, you'll actually learn more and more about me, because I am very transparent, very honest, and very receptive and open to what I feel is the universal movement in life. And so I allow it to come through. And so if that takes me being honest and transparent, that's what I do. That's why I'm here. And I don't mind sharing that with my family. I am a certified life coach. I am also a certified spiritual coach, as well as a whole bunch of other certifications. And once again, like I said, you can get that all out there on the website. My business, my coaching practice is Live For You Coaching. So in 2021, I'm coming out with all kinds of online courses. I'm actually completing my books. You guys are going to be able to get a hold of that and have some very useful, powerful tools. The Freedom Prescription is what it's called. So you're going to be able to get a hold of that. And you're going to actually also have other things. Hopefully, we can do live Zoom events and all kinds of things where we can connect and we can grow. And it's more than just the channel. So the channel is one resource, but there are many other resources out there that you can find out about at www.liveforyou.coaching.com. Family, those of you who are regulars, I love you, so welcome back. As you already know, as I began weeks ago, I've been covering Iyanla Fix My Life episodes from a coaching perspective, because I've seen many reviews. I watch a lot of YouTube. Actually, YouTube is kind of like my favorite channel if you want to look at it that way. And I watch quite a bit of YouTube on a weekly basis. And I see reviews of shows. I've seen many reviews of the Iyanla Fix My Life episodes, but I had yet to see any of them from a life coach's perspective. Iyanla Vanzant is a life coach. She's an inspiration of mine. I've been following her for years. We're talking like since the 90s. Following her for years when she was on Oprah, when she had wrote her book, like In the Meantime and some other things. And it's been very helpful to my journey, to my walk. So I've been following her for some years. But when I watch the reviews, I don't see a lot of life coaches do it. I don't think I've seen any. I think this is the first. So hopefully we're starting a precedent, and hopefully you can get more use out of this from a life coaching perspective. Because you see Iyanla, and a lot of people think she's a therapist. No, she's a life coach, and she's a trained, certified life coach and minister and a lawyer. And so all of that combined, her background as well as with mine, comes together to form the work that we do. And a lot of times our background before we were coaches help a lot. Like me being a historian by trade, an educator by trade, for many years, 18 years, that actually has helped me in my business to be able to elaborate and to be able to deliver stuff in a certain way that a teacher would, but from a coach's perspective. And it really has been very useful to my clients. And also my ability to learn stuff and to be able to use it in practice really rather quickly as an educator has also been something that's been helpful. So Iyanla uses her legal background, she uses her ministerial background and whatnot in order to help her clients. So I've been covering it, and this week is no different. I'm going to continue that trend. It's almost actually towards the end of the season, which we know this is her 10th season, and I think I heard that this is her last season. So I wish I had started this years ago, but unfortunately I didn't have I guess I wasn't motivated to do it, but this time I am. And so This episode was called Aboard the Trauma Train, and I decided to do this episode in 2 videos. So this week we get the first half of it, and next week we get the second half of it. And the reason why I'm doing it in 2 videos is because this family's trauma train was a loaded train of trauma. For those of you who know, my specialization is helping African American males, but I help all people. I have a lot of clients who aren't just African American males, but my niche, because all coaches have a niche or a niche, however you want to say it. My niche is African American males between the ages of 18 and 40. And actually, 2 of the young men on the show were within my niche who have dealt with trauma, who are dealing with trauma. Try to help them to move more into a centered, present place and actually begin to live the life that they truly want and truly desire. And actually, my courses that I'm creating, my book, the other things that I have out there, the teachings, all of that centers around finding your present space. And from that present space, fully realizing yourself and then planning to move towards the next level of your life on an intentional level. I am big on intent. Intention is everything for me. So we work on being intentional about our healing, and we work on being intentional about moving forward and progressing and seeing ourselves the greatness that we truly are. And so this episode dealing with trauma was very interesting, and I have my notes. You guys know how I do. I found it to be very, very interesting. There was a situation that broke out in this family where the uncle, Uncle Herbert, he actually fought with the mother, the central figure, I guess you would say, of this situation. She's actually the one that wrote, Miss Yolanda. And over a situation that happened, it broke out into a violent situation. And then next thing you know, it seems like everything was coming unraveled around this situation. But as I watched the episode, as I've done before, and as you guys probably do as you watch it, you realize that one incident wasn't the catalyst, right? That one incident was just one of many incidences, many times where we see things happen. It's a repetitive cycle. So what we start to learn as the story of this family unfolds is that there are much trauma, many incidents, and many situations and breakdowns that were there long before the incident between Uncle Herbert and Yolanda. But I digress, we'll get there. And so we see things happen, event after event, trauma after trauma, over and over. And Iyanla actually points that out at the very beginning. And she also points out that there are 5 generations of this family. You have what she called the silent generation. That was Mama Lula, who was the elder of the family, a little bit older than Uncle Herbert and even Iyanla herself. She acknowledged that. And then you had the baby boomers. That's Iyanla's generation, and that's that generation, who similarly to the older generation doesn't really, the silent generation, don't really speak, don't really express themselves, aren't really conversationalists, especially men. And actually, oddly enough, while Uncle Herbert is not in my niche, I would still be able to help him because there would be traumas. It'd be a little bit different of an experience, and I would use different tools. But Uncle Herbert can find his healing as well, even though his generation has a different way of expressing and showing up in this world. Then she talked about the Generation Xers. That was Miss Yolanda's generation. That's actually also my generation, by the way. The Gen Xers, different way of handling things. And then the Millennials, this current, a newer generation. And then finally Generation Y, which is where we are now. People who are born from this time and a few years back would be representative of Generation Y, who's a completely different animal. The Millennials have their own uniqueness that a lot of people have noticed, and Iyanla noticed that too, which I thought was funny. But Millennials have their own uniqueness, and I am actually a Gen Xer who happens to be coming of age through the millennial generation. So they've labeled us like Xennials or something like that. Like we're Xers, but we're millennials because we are that bridge between the Generation X and the millennials. But we're also one of the first generations that had to figure out from the old way of doing things, like the internet and things coming into being, to living in fully technologically savvy worlds. And we've had to navigate our way in between that, and we did that pretty successfully, believe it or not. But anyway, so it was Miss Yolanda who had wrote in, and Miss Yolanda, when I heard her talk, I was expecting a monster too, because Iyanla brought in everybody first. She brought in Miss Lula, who was the grandmother. She brought in Mr. Herbert, who was like the uncle daddy, because he's the uncle, Mrs. Lula's brother, but he's also like the patriarch of this family. Miss Lula is the matriarch. And Iyanla wants to figure out what role did everybody play in the breakdown. Because the fact of the matter is, whether or not we acknowledge this or not, when there is a breakdown, when there is a dysfunction, when there is trauma, all kinds of situations in a family, all the time everybody plays a role in it. It cannot exist without each piece. It's just like in a relationship. Both parties are responsible for what occurs in that relationship. So when you're in a family, which is nothing but a big relational dynamic, there is actually different roles that each people play to contribute to whatever is going on in that family, whether it's a positive experience or a breakdown. And so she wanted to know. So she labeled everybody. Like I said, she labeled Lula the foundation. She's the silent generation. She's the beginner. She labeled Herbert the nemesis because of his core centrality to the fight between him and Yolanda and how that caused a whole bunch of stuff. There's Jason and his wife Danica, who are millennials. And they got the sign that said collateral damage, because you're just kind of collateral damage of all the toxicity and the craziness that's been going on in your family before you were even in this family. And Derica, you're you're the fallout, because you're married to the collateral damage, and so you're getting some of that residual from what's been happening in this family even before Justin was there. His name's Justin. I think I said Jason. His name's Justin. Every person has a role to the breakdown. And then, of course, Lauren, who is the daughter, she's also collateral damage because she falls into that same generation of Justin, in which they felt the toxicity from their mom and her experiences and all that stuff. And then lastly, there was KJ, and KJ is the youngest, and usually on the youngest train. And if it's such a huge gap between the youngest and the next before them, there is a generational gap, and he was ignored. The sign Miss Iyanla gave him was ignored. Because 9 times out of 10, that's what happened. I can say in my own family, there is a 6 to 8 year gap between me and my youngest brother. 7, 8 year gap between me and my youngest brother. My experience of my parents, my experience of my mother and my father, and the childhood that I had was nowhere near the same experience that he had. By the time he was coming of age, and by coming of age I mean 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, so forth, growing into trying to recognize the world outside of a child's perspective, my parents were getting a divorce. They were divorced by the time he was 13, and so a lot of that he lived on his own. And so he had to try to figure out the world from a 13-year-old perspective when both of his parents were in their own world, navigating through divorce and refinding themselves and whatever that meant. Whereas by the time my parents were divorced, I was like 18, 19, and so I had pretty much graduated high school. I was in college. I was getting to know myself. I was an adult pretty much. And so I took it a little different than my brother. Why? Because the youngest generation usually is the ignored generation. So that was spot on that Miss Iyanla actually put that out there. So what happened with the grandmama is they never told KJ nothing, because just like the forgotten generation and the baby boomers, they don't talk about nothing. They have this this kind of thing they do in which they try to hide the youngest generation from the realities of life. And we see this happen time and time again in many families. In fact, last week when we talked about the trauma, maybe not last week, maybe it was the week before, when we talked about the trauma of the break-in, and the young man who at the time was 4 years old, now was a grown man 14 years later, who had dealt with the trauma of losing his eye and all that, his grandmother had never really talked to him fully about the situation, because that generation, and it's to their credit and to their character, but also to their downfall, that generation, and when we talk about that generation, we're talking about people 55 and over, the 55s and older, right? The grandmothers, and in some cases, great-grandmothers, great-grandmothers in some families, and no shade on that, no shame or shade on that, but that happens, and that generation just is a silent generation. That's the generation of my parents, the generation after that, where they just don't speak their hurts, right? They will sit in their trauma, they will sit in their pain, and many of them have for many years, and not even speak about what they're going through. And so we see the same thing with Mama Lula, and we see the same thing with Uncle Herbert. So she never spoke about it. So there is a generational gap. And that presents a problem too in a lot of families that we don't even acknowledge sometimes as coaches, as therapists, as thinkers, we don't always acknowledge the generational divides that break down families, the generational divides that break down relationships. I know there are a lot of people out there who are in these kind of double generational relationships. Like the partner is 30 and the person they're with is like 60. That is a huge gulf of time, thought life, and experience that makes it a bit of a challenge. And it's not to say it can't work. It can work. Any relationship can work if you're working with it. And if it's aligned and it's the right universal position. But at the end of the day, that makes it tough because generationally we are different. When I look back at myself, when I look back at my younger brother's generation, and I wonder, like, what the hell are they doing? And then I look at my parents' generation, I'm like, what the hell are they doing? And my parents looking back at my generation, like, what the hell are they doing? And I'm showing my younger brothers, like, y'all late. What the hell are y'all doing? Everybody's judging everybody's generational differences. And it's a funny thing, but what happens when there's a disagreement? Well, the millennials talk about it. The Generation Ys are like kind of like the millennials in that way, but they talk about it, but I'm not interested. You know, like they're really affective. They don't want to deal with stuff directly. The millennials want to talk about it. Generation Y, who like, I'm gonna go seek the help for it. I'm gonna go get a therapist. Generation X, I'm going to go get a therapist and I'm going to fix the problem. We're that generation where we were meditating and trying to figure our way out in the mix. And the generations before just didn't speak about it. And so you have, when there's a divide, it makes it very difficult generationally. And I'm glad Iyanla pointed that out because many times as therapists, as coaches, as thinkers, we don't acknowledge that. So when it came down to the core was Miss Yolanda. Everybody in the family had an issue with Miss Yolanda. Now, that is also a typical thing. Whereas we go through our family, all right, think about your immediate, maybe even your extended, but think about your family. There's generally one person, maybe two, but generally one person who seems to be the troublemaker. Seems to be the one that is the rabble-rouser, the one that is causing all of the chaos, just kind of the disaster, if you want to say, of what's going on in the family. And what I realized in my own experience, because in my family, that's my sister. And so, yes, my mom and my sister and I, my sister and my brothers, it was kind of all kinds of chaos. So my family was my sister. I don't want to call her out on that, but that's who that person was in the family. And she knows that. But what I had to grow to learn in my own experience, even dealing with her and then just in life, is that's usually the most misunderstood person. That's usually the person who has suffered the most trauma, even if it's just in their mind, in the family with everything that's going on. So where me, I was able to go to therapy all the years. It took years of therapy for me. Or where I was able to even come to the consciousness that I needed therapy. My sister might not be able to do that because of how her mind works out. And so usually the person who goes through the most stuff internally is usually the one we consider the problem, the chaotic one, the troublemaker in the family. And they usually need the most help. And in many families, what we do is we repel them, and we are repelled by them and don't want to deal with them. And that's exactly what was happening in this family, except Miss Yolanda was kind of doing it as well. She was also dismissing and kind of letting go people as well. But everybody had issues with her. She seemed to be the core of the breakdown. But there was so many dynamics. This is why it led to a two-parter, because I felt like there was so many dynamics in this relationship that just needed to be addressed from the level of where they needed to be addressed to. And so anyway, what Iyanla said is what happened out of all this chaos and of all this stuff, y'all forgot the love in the process of what y'all got going on here. And that's the problem. When we take love out of the equation and we think about this person did that person did this, I had this feeling, you got that feeling, and it gets chaotic, a lot of times the love is what loses its place in this situation. And she said, so Iyanla said something that I think a lot of life coaches should say. And I think she said something that I think was important to set the standard in this being her profession and in this being something she's not doing for TV or in this something she's not doing for her own personal gain. Because as a life coach, I get no gain other than, of course, making money off of it. But as far as taking a side and picking a place and getting emotionally attached to my clients, I don't do that. Like, I have to do meditation, and I actually have to purge myself of situations after I've gone through certain coaching sessions, because it might be heavy. So I don't take it internally and have it affect my personal life and my relationships and my mental state. I actually do a meditation and a prayer, because I'm a spiritual coach. I do a prayer and a cleansing. Sometimes there's other things I do to cleanse off the energy so that I don't allow it to disrupt me. That's a little behind the curtain coaching thing. So Iyanla said, I ain't on nobody's side. I'm here for the healing. That's it. So don't think I'm going to buddy with you and going to listen to what you say and say you're right, and I'm not going to buddy with you and listen to what you say and make you right. There ain't nobody right or wrong. That don't matter to me. What matters to me is the healing, and that's so important, is that your mission is clear as a coach, as a person who's a therapist, or even a doctor or a preacher or minister trying to help somebody, that you stay clear of making it your intention to be on somebody's side. You're just there for the healing process, whatever that takes. And so, of course, first she pulls Miss Lula to the side, and she talks to her. And she asks, "What are you here? Why am I here for? What do you want?" And Miss Lula says, "I want the walls to come down. I want some healing. I want to feel like there is hope." And Iyanla corrected her. Instead of using that word hope, which means that it may or may not happen, you want healing. You want restoration. Be specific. When it comes to coaching, and when it comes to healing in general, just as a client or just as a person trying to find your center, you have to be very clear and very specific about what you want. You can't be on the fence. Remember, my word is intention, and I'm that way with my clients. I say, hey, look, you have to know what you want. If you're coming into the session, don't just come into the session and play around a little bit. Don't just come into this coaching classes and all these things just to play around a little bit. Know exactly what you want, and my hope is what you want is to find healing and to be more present. That is what you want, and you're willing to trust the process and do whatever it takes in the process, even if it seems silly, even if it seems like mundane and a lot of work. You're willing to do whatever to find your healing and to move from that trauma and live a more present life. You have to be specific. So she specifically says you're here for healing and for restoration. Let's make that clear. Let's make sure that you know that. And she says, she asked the question, she says, when you set in, she tells her specifically, she says, Miss Lula, when you get in your place, everything else comes into line, right? This is a generational thing. And so if the head of the generation ain't right, then it makes it hard for everything else to be right. Now from a personal perspective, in my own personal life, when I think about some of the chaos between my family, between the women in my family on my mom's side, and there's other things too, but just specifically that as an example, because that comes to my mind. The chaos came from great-grandmother to grandmother to daughters to granddaughters to great-granddaughters. And it just was like, it just ain't never got right. It's still to this day not the way it needs to be for us to have a clear path to healing on that side, because the chaos is still there, right? And I always felt, even in my internal spirit, not even as a coach, but just internally, that if that top got it together, the rest of it will fall in place, and it just never did. So I firmly believe that when it comes to familiar pathologies, that it has to be a correction at the top of the charts before we even consider what's going on down at the bottom. So Miss Lula said she was in a relationship, and she was in a relationship with a woman named Miss Nancy. And Miss Nancy was her partner for 45 years. They raised 5 children together. Back in the day, Miss Nancy was a white woman and a black woman together back in the day when that was dangerous, let alone to be in a same-sex relationship. And Miss Nancy was like the father figure. She was the provider. She was the kind of the more dominant fatherly-like figure in this situation. And we find out that Miss Lula did everything in her power to try to hide what her relationship was around her kids. So she wasn't affectionate with Miss Nancy. She didn't show love. There were no public displays. There was none of that, because she didn't want her kids to think anything negative about her. And that was a problem, right? That was a problem because, first of all, we don't shame what kind of relationship a person has. Love is indeed love, right? And I know some of my family here, I know some of you are religious, But you have to think beyond the religiosity. You have to think beyond the rules of religion that tell you you can and cannot do something. Love is a universal energy. Love is of God for my religious people. Love is of spirit. It is the original to me, the original entity. And so it has no religiosity behind it. So when the full force of love is at its highest power and it is moving through two people to come together to share a union for 45 freaking years, that's love. And to not be able to express that love because of what other people might think, or because you don't want to hurt somebody, because of their preconceived judgments and biases about your love, is a shameful thing. Because if we're all in our center place, if we're all in our healthy place, love is love. But unfortunately, Miss Lula is of that school, the old school, where love wasn't always received, especially in her community. I can speak for the black community myself. It's a difficult thing to be who you are as a same-sex loving person, or any divergence, as they would call it, or as somebody uninformed would call it, from what they're considered to be normal. And it's unfortunate because a lot of people are not living their full truths. A lot of people are not living their full selves. So one of the pathologies that you see in this family, and it started from the head, Miss Lula on down, was the idea of not saying and showing how you feel. Not expressing the truth. And we find out from Miss Lula that she had been in an abusive relationship. The father of Yolanda and some of the other kids, Yolanda's father was a social worker. Miss Nancy never knew the father. She never asked, so that went unspoken in that relationship, which may have caused a situation. The real father was abusive, and so Miss Lula had to get away from him. And she was a gay woman, a lesbian woman, trying to be with a man, probably to set up the pretense and hide the truth and not address things directly, which, like I said, is a common pathology in a lot of families and a lot of communities. Yolanda and Lula actually fought over Miss Nancy when she was dying. Miss Nancy had cancer, and she was in the hospital, and Miss Lula didn't want to give her morphine because morphine makes you sleepy, and she was on her deathbed, so if she had fallen asleep, she may not have woken up. And Miss Lula didn't want her partner to go out without her being able to express that love and thank her, all of the things that you want to do at the last minute if you're given a moment. Well, it became an argument between Miss Lula and Yolanda because Miss Lula asked Derica, who is Justin, Mrs. Yolanda's son's wife, who's a registered nurse, about it. And Yolanda was like, well, you're being selfish. She's in pain. She needs the morphine, whatever. And eventually Miss Lula gave in, and Miss Nancy did die. So ultimately, Miss Lula was right in how she felt, but it went away. And so that kind of caused a little bit of resentment in Miss Lula, but she let it go, as she's been letting it go for a lot of things, just going unspoken. Her emotions are going unspoken. She has no voice. And Iyanla actually told her, you need to find your voice because your voice is important in this dynamic, but she had no voice. And so 3 days after Miss Nancy had died, she invited the kids over to her house. And next thing you know, it begins to be a big fight. It begins to be a big argument between Yolanda and Derica and Miss Lula and all this crazy stuff. And Miss Lula just said, y'all have to leave. So she goes and get her brother Herbert, Daddy Uncle Herbert, to come in and to navigate through this and to get the people out of her house. That's my brother gonna take care of me, so she went to get him. Well, that led to a physical altercation between Mr. Herbert and Yolanda, who refused to leave. And that was a catalyst moment for them of this toxic situation that they thought they were coming here to talk about, but really, like I said, once we started to go into it, we realized that there were so many other things that were there. When they went to court, Yolanda turned to her mom, even sent her mom a picture calling her a bitch. And I mean, just all kinds of nasty, negative things, and it never been right. All her brother was trying to do was stand up for his sister. And next thing you know, it began to be this whole situation between Miss Lula and Miss Yolanda. And I mean, we find out so much stuff. We find out that Miss Yolanda was Miss Lula was in an abusive relationship. We learned about that. We learned that she wasn't afraid of Yolanda, but she was afraid of losing Yolanda's love. Because Yolanda was real close to Miss Nancy, and so you can kind of see how that dynamic plays out. But Miss Yolanda told Miss Lula, to stay away from her and stay away from her kids, and Miss Lula abided by it and just did as she was told. So much, right? That's only the tip of the iceberg, right? We hadn't even gotten deep, and you can see how heavy. So you can see why I decided to break this story down into 2 parts, because there's so many dynamics. It's the dynamic of not being fully honest and present, and being able to express and demonstrate yourself in front of people out of fear of what might be said or might be thought. You got the dynamic of toxic family relationships, secrets being kept. You got the dynamics of picking sides and abusive relationships already trickling down. Roles. People play roles in families, and sometimes it don't always go the way it needs to go, and everybody's involved, but nobody wants to take accountability for their involvement in the breakdown. So it is quite a lot. And so that's why I did it. I'm doing this in 2 parts. Next part coming next week. So if you want to hear the rest, and if you want to get some more of this Iyanla Fix My Life from a life coaching perspective, and get some nuggets and some wisdom and some tea from me, then come back to this place. Same place, same time. We're going to deal with it. And like I always say, I love you, and I will see you in the next video.